like taking the lessons learned from the first time around.
We think a lot about at Third Derivative is scalability.
Welcome to Mission Log D3, Third Derivative's fun journey of learning, where we are tracking the development of the world's largest climate tech accelerator as we build it and learning lessons for how to support startups to succeed. Bryan, as CEO of Third Derivative, what have we got this week as a lesson?
Well, so first, really pleased to introduce our guest here, my distinguished colleague, Josh Agenbroad, who is not only Third Derivative's head of research and insights, but is actually one of the OGs of Third Derivative. Really helped get it off the ground as a distinguished co-founder. So Josh, would you just take a minute and kind of introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Bryan. As you said, my name's Josh Agenbroad. Let's see. Yeah, it's kind of repetitive, right? Head of research and insights, but been here since the very beginning. I think I'm technically the first full-time paid person working on this, but before Third Derivative, I was at Rocky Mountain Institute. Been there for more than 10 years, which is hard to imagine. Have a mechanical engineering background. At RMI, I bounced around between a bunch of different things. I think I worked on like all the 4 major sectors that RMI has. So buildings, electricity, transportation, industry. I like the client work, so I was doing a lot of what was basically management consulting with large corporations, trying to help them make the business case for improving energy efficiency or adopting renewables, figuring out which technologies might work for them in their situation. I also helped start our China program, so I spent about 2 years working with primarily the Chinese government with the energy branch of NDRC. And then after that, I helped start our Africa program. So about same thing there, about 2-3 years, mostly in West Africa, working with governments there, looking at energy access and how to improve the efficiency and reliability and cost of the electricity grid there while expanding electricity access. And one of the really interesting things about that work was, right now you can look at how does off-grid fit into that. So either solar home systems or mini grids, where should you be deploying one of those things versus extending the grid or improving the grid? And then, after that, I took a little sabbatical, and during that sabbatical I was thinking about what is the most important, most impactful thing, most interesting thing that I could be putting my time into, and that's where I got started on Third Derivative. So I just really felt from my time at RMI that corporations, as they're trying to decarbonize, were looking for solutions that were not at the level of maturity that they were going to be able to adopt them anytime soon. And also I felt that they were not the ones who were going to take the risk or invest the time getting those solutions to that stage, even though, at RMI, we've been talking about a lot of solutions that could work, could be cost effective, for the entire time I've been at RMI, 10 years, but they've been kind of at the lab or university level, and they haven't made it to the point where they could really start to be adopted at scale. And I think is a major, hang up if we're going to solve climate change. We need ways to decarbonize beyond just the electricity grid, where we have solar and wind now being adopted, or electric vehicles on the passenger side for transportation. But how are we going to decarbonize buildings? How are we going to decarbonize industry? And so that was really why I started focusing in on new technology and startup innovation. That was kind of a long intro, but I mean that is.
That's why we pay Thomas the big bucks. Thomas will go in and edit this all down, and it'll be beautiful and streamlined. All good. Better to have more content than less. So, Josh, couldn't agree more about the urgent need to transform the system of climate tech, hard climate tech, commercialization, deployment, and scale. And Danny, as we teased in a previous episode, one of the things that we think a lot about at Third Derivative is scalability. Right? How can we take the things that we're doing today and add extra zeros to them and scale up their impact in future? And so, Josh, since you have been a key actor in our startup kind of scouting, evaluation, diligence, and selection process, I'm hoping you might share with us a little bit about our recent kind of revamp of our selection process. Why we did it, how we're doing it, how we hope to increase scalability and efficiency while at the same time maintaining the rigor that kind of helps set Third Derivative apart.
Yeah, I mean, that is the main focus for Third Derivative right now, not just for the selection process, but also for the way we're supporting startups as well. Is like taking the lessons learned from the first time around, seeing where the value is at, and then figuring out how to scale it up, because we need to go, we need to be able to go bigger, faster in order to actually have the impact we want. So, we reviewed over 600 applications the first time around, and along the way, we gathered a lot of feedback from our partners, whether that's investors or corporates, and all of that took a kind of a long time. We did multiple rounds of applications. We did multiple rounds of interview with each startup. We brought in technical advisors to help us understand whether some of the like really kind of more complex leading edge technology was feasible or not. And all that took a long time. It took I think I hate to even say it, but I think it took us close to 6 months to review those 600 applications and choose the first batch of startups. So kind of the main first goal was we need to go faster. That's just, that's an eternity in the world of a startup. So we're aiming now to get that down to 2 months max, and getting back to a startup after 1 month after they apply. So when I say getting back, I mean either setting up an interview or telling them that right now it's not a fit, it's not a good time. We'll talk again in the future. So we get back to them within 1 month, and we come up with a final decision within about 2 months of them applying. That was kind of one of the most important first overall bits. Another really important piece is spreading the selection process more across our different teams at Third Derivative. So we now have a fund engagement team that can focus more solely on getting feedback and insight from the funds, expanding our network of funds. And then we also have an ecosystem fit team that looks at how can we best support these startups? So making sure we're finding startups that fit with the support we give. And if let's say the research and insights team is identifying barriers for that startup to be able to succeed and commercialize that technology, well, then our ecosystem fit team is saying, we can help you overcome those barriers. And so we don't want to select out startups just because there are barriers. What we want to do is figure out how to commercialize things that wouldn't otherwise be able to get there on their own. And so that's why we have a much, stronger role for that team now in the selection process. The other thing that's really important about bringing the ecosystem fit team into the process more deliberately is to have a more seamless transition from application review into the plan for how we're going to support that startup. So again, if we can identify the areas where the Third Derivative program is a good fit to help that startup, then we can right away start saying, once they're in the program, we're going to link them up with this corporate, and we're going to get moving down the path towards a partnership, or they need this sort of mentor, or they can be connected into RMI in this way in order to improve what they're doing. Those are some of the things that come to mind for me right away.
Can I just try to draw some of the lessons out of that for our imagined audience here at Mission Log? We think that sort of other accelerator managers and people in the sort of ecosystem of entrepreneur support organizations watch this to try to pick up tips and tricks and learn from what you're doing with Third Derivative. So I'm going to repeat back to you what I took as three kind of lessons that you're attempting with the model and research and insights with the solicitation and selection process. You're sort of front loading classically what gets done during accelerator programs. You've got a crew that are looking at investability effectively, even in the selection stage. So you're talking to your funds team and checking on whether there are investors in our community of investors that want to do this deal or might consider it at least. You're also looking at the offtake potential for the product or service that the startup produces. So this ecosystem fit team that assesses the startup for match with some of the corporate partners in the Third Derivative ecosystem. And then thirdly, in the solicitation phase even and during selection, before committing to the startup with the 100K and the commitment of an 18-month program, you're already developing a plan for where they'd go to do proof of concept. So effectively, you've sort of bought into the selection stage a lot of what gets done classically in the course of an accelerator program, or at least you're attempting to assess for those criteria, even if you're not executing on them in the 2-month compressed selection stage. Is that a fair summary?
I think that's fair. The one thing I want to actually take a little bit of issue with is that the starting with investability. I would say we don't start with investability, actually. The first thing we do is we look at climate impact. And we take kind of a top-down perspective of where are the emissions coming from that need solutions, and is this is this addressing those needs? And is this one of the most important things we could be doing for that emission category in order to actually address it? The next thing we look at is what I would call techno-economics, which I think is a little bit different than investability. It's more of kind of the fundamental, like, could this work? Could this business model work regardless of whether it's a good investment? Then after that, what we look at next is sort of, is it scalable, which is related to techno-economics? And then kind of finally, what is the commercialization path, where are they going to be able to find the fundraising along the way in order to get there? Because we can help them with it. That is an area where we absolutely want to help people more efficiently find the capital they need. Yeah.
I think that's great, Josh. Good clarification and correction, because I'm pleased here we're not just pimping things that are highly investable if they're not high impact and scalable, and that's what we need to be doing to accelerate acceleration at this needed time of climate solutions. I just learned a lot. What are our startups of the week, Bryan?
Well, I want to take advantage of the fact that we have Josh here with us, our head of research and insights, who knows 1,000 times more than I do about our entire portfolio. But we have, with that large portfolio, we've got a lot of startups making waves and in the news right now. So, Josh, what can you tell us about our good Italian friends with Energy Dome?
Energy Dome just closed an $11 million round. Energy Dome has been one of my favorites right from the very beginning. It's a long duration storage technology that's very cost effective. They use the phase change of CO2 in a closed loop to store energy. So I don't know if you've heard of, let me explain like the basics first, right? So they compress CO2 until it turns into a liquid, and they do that when you have excess electricity. Then when you want to generate electricity on the back end, they allow that to expand through an expansion turbine, and then that generates electricity. So it's like a battery.
Yep. Awesome. $11 million Series A, big deal.
And more than that, it's attracted a lot of attention. They were featured in TechCrunch and a number of other publications. We've known about them for a while, but they've been a little under the radar, and now they are out there and moving.
And I can tell you it was like very oversubscribed. We had tons of interest from our network and beyond asking about them. I don't know how much we want to get into like competition between them and other startups, but it's similar to a startup called Highview Power that others may have heard of, which uses air to do basically the same thing. The advantage of using CO2 instead of air is that it can be stored as a liquid at ambient temperature. In order to liquefy air, you have to go really down to like cryogenic temperatures, and that just creates a lot of complexity of, really specific, more expensive like heat exchangers, and just all the equipment all around has to be built and designed to handle those lower temperatures.
Energy Dome, using thermodynamics for good. Well done.
Now, one other thing I would say, it's kind of interesting, is that the challenge with using CO2 in a closed loop is you have to store it the whole time. And it's a gas for one half of the cycle. So a gas is big, right? So you basically need literally a balloon in order to store the CO2. The cool thing is that the team has previous experience working on anaerobic digesters, and you use basically the same technology to store the methane gas that comes off of an anaerobic digester. So that's kind of like one of the keys that allowed them to, I think, kind of see how this could be done.
And there's a famous Italian movie with balloons, I'm sure. So there's a lot of balloon know-how that they're tapping. Anyway, let's go to the next company of the week.
Josh, we've got another startup from our first cohort that's been making waves, Blue Frontier. What can you tell us about Blue Frontier?
I see what you did there, Bryan. Blue Frontier making waves.
Dun, dun, dun.
So Blue Frontier, I think the reason you're mentioning Blue Frontier is that they recently won the Verge competition, the Verge pitch competition. They were also named as one of the most fundable startups by the Pepperdine business schools like annual competition /list. They've been in our program, since the first cohort. they definitely get a lot of good attention, but it's a really exciting and important technology. It's for air conditioning in commercial buildings. Air conditioning is a huge electrical load, especially as the world gets hotter, as developing markets are, becoming more wealthy and electrifying. And I don't know, I'm trying to think of the word here. More air conditioning in emerging markets nowadays than there was in the past. It's a huge load. Just to put it in perspective, right? Like in a typical home, lights, like a single light bulb is like maybe 10 watts or something like that, and your typical air conditioning is like a couple kilowatts, so 1,000 times. Now, the technology they use is really cool. It's evaporative cooling, so it's like a swamp cooler. For those people from Australia like you, Danny, or me in Albuquerque, you're probably familiar with the swamp cooler. The challenge with it is it only works in a dry climate, and people complain that the air coming out of it is a little bit humid, or maybe it smells kind of weird. But what Blue Frontier does is they use an indirect method that makes it so that the actual like evaporation air doesn't actually mix with the air you're putting into the building. So you don't have any of those complaints, and you can still use it in a humid market.
And it meets your criteria for techno-economics and scalability?
Oh, definitely. I mean, your basic swamp cooler is actually really simple, and the energy savings are like 80 or 90%. So it's pretty strong from that perspective. Yeah.
Well, people tell me I have a funny odor coming from me, so maybe I can engage Blue Frontier to make me more palatable to the rest as well.
Wow. We went there. It's good we're on Zoom. And with that, we might thank Josh for coming in. And I think it was so much fun digging deep on these companies. We should get you back on the next mission log from D3. Bryan, do you want to tell them where to find us?
Find us where you find your podcasts. Find us on YouTube if you love seeing our bright and smiling faces. Hit that like, subscribe button, and leave us some comments. What do you think about the lessons that we've been learning about how to select startups for a program and assess fit scalably, efficiently, and also with rigor? Maybe you have some suggestions. We'd love to hear about it. But stay tuned, stick with us, because we have more lessons learned coming at you next.
D3 mission log right here next week.